Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna discuss Tribbie, an insane HP scaling support who puts the harm in harmony by combining rare rest pen buffs, increased damage taken debuffs, and follow-ups to help allies deal big PP damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, Lightcones, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information shown is from the creator experience server, so some things could still change when her banner drops. Let's first talk about her insane skill. Using their skill provides her with the Numiosity buff, which grants all allies 24% rest pen lasting for 3 of Tribbie's turns. This is an extremely rare buff that you can only obtain in these 3 ways, which by the way also stacks with Tribbie's rest pen. But due to it being a rare buff, it's good for characters that don't benefit too much from attack buffs. It's perfect for characters like the Herta or even Aglia who tend to buff themselves with so much attack or HP scaling DPSs. As for her ult, it's a massive HP scaling AoE that does a couple of things. First, it activates a zone that increases every enemy's damage vulnerability by 30%, lasting for 2 of Tribbie's turns. This is a universal damage vulnerability debuff that only a few characters provide at E0. And yes, they also stack with their own debuff. But the more important thing is that with this debuff combined with their skills rest pen, it allows Tribbie to be used as a universal support that can benefit any team or DPS, even break or DOT focused ones. And these abilities are also perfect for duo DPS comps due to the entire party being able to take advantage of them. But like I said, it only lasts for 2 of her turns, so it's very important that you build her a bit slow for her buffs to last longer. While the zone is active, it deals additional damage to the enemy with the highest HP, scaling off 12% of Tribbie's HP per target hit. So if you manage to hit 5 enemies, this deals up to 60% of Tribbie's max HP as additional damage. You can think of it like a mini version of Robin's Concerto damage procs. It can crit and is affected by universal damage boosts. But unlike Robin, this ability doesn't have a fixed crit rate or damage. So HP and crit stats are very important in ensuring it deals good damage. As for her talent, as busy as a Tribbie, it deals an HP scaling AoE follow-up, triggering once per every ally's ult, with the trigger count resetting upon using her ult, which by the way is perfect for characters like Fei Xiao or the Herta who needs attacks to charge their ults. Basically, she only gets 3 FUAs, 1 per each ally. Just note, it's not worth sacrificing ult uptime trying to get 3 FUAs before using her ult again. The damage vulnerability debuff is just way more important for the team's damage output. And for her technique, if you're happy and you know it, it just allows her to get the Numiosity buff right at the beginning of combat, allowing for smoother setups when the battle begins. But for ability priority, I recommend leveling her skill and ult first, then her talent, and finally basics. You can opt to ignore her basics if you want, but you still tend to use it when her skill is up, so it might not be a bad idea to level it up. As for their first bonus ability, while her ult is active, it gives her an HP buff equaling to 9% of all allies' total HP, not counting her own. They usually get around 1.5 to 1.7k HP on average from this ability, but if you decide to use her with HP scaling characters like Mighty, Blade, or healers, expect to get way more. While her second ability regens 30 energy at the start of combat and gives a bonus 1.5 energy for each target an ally hits. Now that 1.5 bonus energy may seem deceptively low. However, Tribbie can actually get so much energy from this talent. This is because it not only gets affected by an energy rope, but if you also combine it with a high attack frequency or AoE unit on a stage with a lot of enemies, it actually enables Tribbie to reliably get her ult back before the 2-turn duration ends due to her ult only having a 120 energy cost. This is of course another reason for you to build her slow so her allies can get enough turns to help build their ult. As for her last ability, it buffs her damage by 72% every time she does an FUA, stacking up to 3 times and lasting for 3 turns. And because this is an all-type damage boost, this buffs both her FUA damage and her additional damage procs. Unlike most supports, Tribbie is actually capable of dealing good damage, especially at full stacks of the talent. So you can think of her as a mini sub-DPS. Get it? Mini because they're small? With her kit out of the way, we can talk about her Eidolons. For her E1, while her ult zone is up and whenever an ally attacks, it deals true damage equaling to 24% of the total damage the attack dealt to an enemy that was hit with Tribbie's additional damage. Now, this 24% may seem small, but in reality, it's not. For example, if an AoE DPS hits 1 million total damage across 5 enemies, or a single target DPS hits 1 million on a boss, it gets that total and deals an additional 240k to the enemy with the highest HP, which in most cases is an elite or boss. In this case, this is a 120% damage increase for the AoE DPS and a 24% increase for a single target DPS on the boss or elite. And just as a reminder, the percentages I mentioned for the AoE DPS is only for this case and will vary depending on the unit attacking and the number of enemies. But for single target DPSs, it will always equal to 24% bonus damage no matter what, which is still very much appreciated by high single target damage units like Fei Xiao or Boot Hill. But AoE and Blast units tend to benefit more from this Eidolon. This is because they tend to hit larger total numbers while dealing smaller individual target damage. Meaning it not only scales better for AoE or Blast units, but it also makes it easier for them to deal with elites or bosses, especially in Pure Fiction or MOC. But just a point of concern for AoE units, especially in Apocalyptic Shadow and MOC, the less enemies there are, the lower the total damage. Meaning, you get less damage from this Eidolon. TLDR, this Eidolon will help any unit, especially AoE focused ones, to deal big PP damage. Like it's so insane, I would go as far as saying that I would recommend this over her S1. The raw damage increase alone is way too good to pass up on. While her E2 increases the damage for additional damage by 120% of its original damage, and deals an extra instance of additional damage when it gets procced. Not as crazy as her E1, but this of course is just more 3B damage, which is pretty neat. As for her E4, while her skill's Numiosity is active, it provides the team with an 18% Def Ignore. And yes, it also does well and stacks with other sources of Defense Shred and Def Ignore in the game. And finally, her E6. She automatically launches a follow-up upon using her ult, and it buffs her follow-up damage by a whopping 729%. Which is insane, because this is the biggest follow-up damage boost in the game. And it basically turns her into a mini follow-up DPS that will nuke the shit out of bosses. She literally puts the harm in harmony by going from adorable support to world-ending menace at the cost of a few $1,000s. With her Eidolons out of the way, let's talk about Lightcones. Tribbie's adorable signature gives her 36% crit damage, and after follow-up attacking, regens 12 energy for her. And she gains the Presage buff, which gives the party a 48% crit damage buff while it's active. And at the beginning of the battle, it gives her a bonus 21 energy and the Presage buff as well. The offensive buffs are of course nice for more 3B and team damage. But the more notable thing is that aside from letting her get her ult at the start of combat in endgame content, it lets her achieve 2-turn ults way easier because of this LC's bonus energy upon follow-up attacking. Just note, 2-turn ults are still very achievable even without this Lightcone. But with that being said, she has a number of good alternatives, with Memories and Meshing Cogs being good options for getting lots of energies to get 2-turn ults. Meshing Cogs does give a lot more energy because you can proc its passive by attacking and getting hit, which is not too hard to do because of all of the AoE enemies in the endgame stages these days. However, due to its low base HP, it does cause 3B to deal way lower damage. On the other hand, Memory's passive only procs by attacking, so you do end up getting less energy from it, and its bonus break effect stat is useless for 3B. However, it does make up for it by having a higher base HP, which results in more 3B damage. Dance 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 is also another very good option. It enables her to advance an ally's action every time she ults. And with high attack frequency or AoE units helping her build her ult, she can basically spam it in some stages, enabling her to give her allies so much turns to deal damage. And with this LC, there's actually an argument that can be made of giving her a bit more speed so she can spam more ults to spam more DDD action advances. But I'll talk more about that in the stats section. As for other Lightcones, Poised to Bloom is a decent option for giving bonus crit damage to comps with two of the same path, like the Herta, Fei Xiao, or Pure Fiction comps. Though the bonus attack from this Lightcone is useless for 3B. Carve the Moon is also another decent option, giving a myriad of party-wide buffs. However, the buffs you get from this are random, so it can give inconsistent results. But with her Lightcones out of the way, let's look at possible relics. Her best set for damage is the new Poet set. Not only does it give 10% bonus quantum damage, but it also rewards you for building her slow, which in most cases you want to do anyway. It gives her up to 32% crit rate just by having her go below 95 speed, which is actually pretty easy to achieve with her base 96 speed, and this sets 8% speed reduction. And of course, due to the crit rate it gives, it becomes way easier to build her. However, since this is a relatively new set, not a lot of people will have good pieces lying around. So, with that being said, Genius of Brilliant Stars is also another great option, especially if you plan to give her some speed. Just like the Poet set, it gives her 10% bonus quantum damage. But the more notable thing is that it also lets her deal more damage by enabling her to ignore a big chunk of the enemy's defense, especially if you're fighting quantum weak enemies. And it also stacks with her E4 and does great with sources of Defense Shred and Defense Ignore. And as usual, 2-piece combos are great options for giving her beneficial stats like quantum damage, crit, and HP. So, just pick whichever one you have the best sub-stats on. As for planar sets, her best one for damage would be the new Bone Collection set. Not only does it give a bonus 12% HP, but if Tribbie's HP reaches 5k, it gives her a bonus 28% crit damage, which isn't really too difficult to reach due to her abilities and you mainly building her for HP. But this is a new set coming out on patch 3.1, so I'm 100% certain no one has good pieces of this yet. But for other options, Von Whack, Shaka, and Penacony, of course, are very good supportive options, with their bonus energy allowing Tribbie to get 2-turn ults way easier. Von Whack, of course, being good if you need her to act first to build energy for early ults, while Penacony is good if you're running her in Mono Quantum, and Lushaka just being a very good general use option for giving your slot 1 DPS some bonus attack. Broken Keel and Fleet are also supportive options to give your party bonus attack or crit damage. However, despite Fleet giving Tribbie some beneficial HP, it needing 120 speed to activate its buff makes it inherently incompatible with the Poet set. So just keep that in mind. With her possible sets out of the way, let's talk about stats. Looking at all her stats and traces, despite being a support, she gains 37% crit damage on top of 10% crit rate from her traces, which would have been nice on a DPS, but she also gains 10% HP on top of having a high 1047 base HP. And she also has the abysmal speed of 96, which in this case is beneficial for her. So, make sure to consider those when building. For main stats, you want a crit chest, HP boots, ER rope, and an HP or quantum orb. Just note, a crit damage chest is preferred if you're using the Poet set since it does give you a lot of crit rate. As for substats, you only really want to focus on crit stats and then HP stats. This is because for most of her builds, you want to keep her at base speed since she does want to be built slow. However, like I said while talking about Dance, there is an argument for giving her some speed, wherein a good goal is 120. Now, there are both pros and cons to building her slow and giving her 120 speed, so let's first discuss base speed. For base speed, her buffs would not only last longer, but you can also get more damage out of Tribbie. This is because you can take advantage of her additional damage procs longer, and you can invest in more offensive stats. This is all on top of giving her allies more time to generate her ult, being able to take advantage of the Poet set, and generally being easier to build. However, this is at the cost of generating SP slower, and you might have trouble getting 2-turn ults to keep uptime on her ult if you're running Tribbie in a team without high attack frequency units or stages without a lot of enemies. A slow Tribbie is very reliant on having high attack frequency units to help build her ult, or her S1 if you decide to run her with slower attacking units, especially in stages with a few enemies like boss fights. This is generally the more comfy option since in most cases you won't have to worry about ult uptime given you give her the proper setups. As for 120 speed, you not only generate SP but also more energy faster, especially if you're running memories or cogs, which lets her get more ultimates, resulting in more follow-ups from Tribbie, and if you're running DDD, more action advances. And if you're using Von Whack as well, this lets her act first and get her ult faster at the start of combat. But most important of all, this allows her to compensate if you're using her in a stage with less enemies or running her without high attack frequency units, by being able to generate a good bit of energy for herself even without the help of her S1. However, there are a lot of cons as well. Her buffs and ult last shorter, meaning there would be higher pressure in making sure you get 2-turn ults to keep buff uptime. which can be easy to mess up if you're not careful. Aside from this, it also makes her way harder to build for two reasons. First, it results in lower 3B damage because you have to allocate stats away from crit and HP to invest in speed. And second, you won't be able to use the Poet set anymore, which makes building her a lot more of a headache. Overall, this is just the less comfy and more hassle option, but it's the more universal build, allowing 3B to do well in just about any team. As for which one is better, well, it depends on the team you're running her on, but in my opinion, it's still base speed, since it's just way more comfy and easier to build. And you can get around most of its issues just by having a high attack frequency unit. But with her build out of the way, let's move on to possible teammates. Now, I would just like to preface this by saying that due to the nature of her buffs, debuffs, and her kit as a whole, she can support just about any team or DPS regardless if they're crit-based, HP scaling, DOT, or even break damage oriented. But with that in mind, one of the characters that benefits most from her is the Herta. Madame Herta is a character that buffs herself with a lot of attack and crit damage, meaning it devalues attack and crit damage buffs from supports like Robin, Ting Yun, or the action advancers, which makes 3B's respan and damage vulnerability all the more valuable since those are rare for her teams. Aside from this, both of them generate energy through hit count, so they want to be in teams with high attack frequency characters generating their ults. Overall, due to the many layers of synergy these two have, in my opinion, 3B is the best support for the Herta currently, beating options like the RMC, Robin, Sunday, and Ruan Bei. Aglaya is another unit that greatly benefits from 3B. Just like the Herta, she tends to buff herself with a lot of attack, meaning she benefits a lot more from 3B's respan and damage vulnerability debuff than Robin's attack buff, and Aglaya's high attack frequency can help charge 3B's ult. However, unlike Robin, she doesn't have an action advance, which may be a problem for generating Aglaya's ult if you don't have Sunday or her E1. But if you do have the proper setups to get around Aglaya's inherent energy problem, 3B is one of the best secondary supports to run with Aglaya and Sunday, with this Aglaya team being able to clear any content just fine due to the insane amount of damage buff Aglaya gets from this team. She also works really well in follow-up teams, with Fei Xiao being her best partner for those. Fei Xiao of course benefits a lot from 3B's respan and damage vulnerability, helping her deal good damage. But aside from this, she also benefits quite a bit from 3B's follow-ups being able to charge her ult. And just like the Herta, Fei Xiao's best teams are usually duo DPS comps with high attack frequency characters. So not only does 3B get so much energy from Fei Xiao teams, but she's also able to support the entire team's damage output as well. However, in my opinion, Robin is still definitely the best option for follow-up teams due to her innate synergy with high attack frequency follow-up units. So 3B may not be a direct upgrade to Robin in follow-up teams, but she is a good alternative if you don't have the pretty Songbird. Now, because of her respan buffs and damage vulnerability debuffs, she works extremely well for break comps as an alternative to Ruan Bei if you don't have her. You can run her in a Boot Hill, Firefly, and Rappa teams, and the teams will be able to clear any content just fine. Now, she is not a direct upgrade to Ruan Bei and is simply an alternative to her in these teams if you don't have her. 3B may buff break damage with her supportive utility, but Ruan Bei's plethora of break-related benefits are way more appreciated for break-oriented comps. She can also be used as a support in DOT teams, with her damage vol and respan also affecting DOT damage. Now sadly, she isn't really the support that DOT units have been looking for, and isn't really a major upgrade to the team's current best supports. But she's still able to support these units in clearing a lot of content if you want to use her in these teams, and please buff Kafka. Of course, she also works well with HP scaling DPSs like Mighty and Blade when he gets buffed, since her buffs aren't attack-based after all. And according to the stream, Mighty does increase his max HP, which in turn also increases 3B's HP, meaning they definitely work well together. And here are other crit-based teams you can use with 3B, with a Blade and possible Mighty team included as well. Now, a lot of these DPSs are kind of outdated, but a lot of them are also slated to get buffs, so hopefully they'll be able to clear endgame content again. Weirdly enough, she also has synergy with Sparkle for Mono Quantum. This is due to our local Laughing Menace buffing quantum damage just by running her with quantum units, which by the way also buffs 3B's damage. Now, sadly, Seile and Jingchue are the only units that can benefit from this combo, since Jade, especially at E0, wants to be ran with other units, and Shui Yi is a break DPS. But once Seile and hopefully Jingchue get the buffs Hoyo promised, this will most likely be one of their best teams that can hopefully clear any endgame content, especially MOC. But that's about it because I'm beginning to lose my voice. But there's just one last question. Is she a must-pull? Well, honestly, it depends on the state of your account. She's not really a must-pull if you already have both Ruan Mei and Robin. Tribbie isn't really a major upgrade for the teams that Ruan Mei or Robin best supports, and if you have both of them, I'd say you'd already have enough coverage to support any team in the game, which devalues Tribbie's worth for your account. So in this case, I believe it's much better to go for characters that will benefit your account more or characters you like more. And with the Fate collab on the horizon, with the possibility of characters that will never get a rerun, and other 3.x units like Anaxa and Castories, saving Jades isn't really a bad idea. However, if you're missing either Ruan Mei or Robin, or just any good support in general, Tribbie is definitely a must-pull. She's a fantastic universal support you can use in just about any team as an alternative to Ruan Mei or Robin, with her performing similarly, if not better than these two in some cases. She provides a rare rest pen buff and damage vulnerability debuff that just about any DPS regardless of damage type can benefit from. This is all on top of her being easy to build and play, making her perfect for both veterans and beginners alike. And in my humble opinion, if you're a beginner, she is definitely a must-pull, since she'll be able to carry your DPS through content like the story, farming, events, etc., making her time in this game a bit easier. And her being a universal support will make her usable for a very long time compared to a DPS who tends to get power crept way faster. Plus, with the possibility of more HP or unique scaling units coming out, she would only get more characters and teams to support, increasing her future value even more. But at the end of the day, if you like Tribbie, pull for them, and if you don't, well don't. Personally, I would have to skip because E1 Aglia made me broke. But make sure to tell me what you think about them in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub.